Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, June 18th. Derek and Ripert, Sarah Britt back with us after a few weeks off. It was a weird stretch of schedule. We had fewer shows for a couple of weeks, so you got a breather, and then you were on vacation. Britt, welcome back. Thanks for coming back.
I know. It feels like I've been gone for a while, guys. But what's great about this time of year is I don't feel like I missed that much either. I was catching up and didn't really feel like a lot happened. I was preparing to be way behind. But outside of weird things like the Mets all of a sudden winning and
the Grimace thing.
Yeah, Snoop Dogg being on the Brewers that we'll get into later. I didn't really miss that much. So it's good to be back for like the stretch run, I guess.
Yeah, when you're in it every day, you're like, you miss so much. But it's like now I'm like, well, mostly a bunch of injuries.
Yeah. Which is any time of the year, right? You miss a week or two. Right. There's going to be some guys that you're like, oh, he got hurt. He's not playing, So, yeah.
Hey, you didn't miss a lot, but you did miss a couple things, I feel. And one thing was something that you were supposed to miss. We were all supposed to miss this one. You may recall around 6 or 7 o'clock Eastern on Friday that Major League Baseball dropped this little tidbit that umpire Pat Hoberg had been disciplined for violating Rule 21, the league's gambling rules. And we don't know exactly what Pat Hoberg did at this point.
Was that even during business hours? I feel like I got that like
it was
super
really
late.
Really late. It was a peak Friday news dump, right? Okay, so as they do each and every time, Major League Baseball was very quick to point out that while MLB's investigation not finding evidence the games worked by Mr. Hoberg were compromised or manipulated in any way, Major League Baseball determined that discipline was warranted. And Mr. Hoberg has chosen to appeal that determination. Therefore, we cannot comment further until the appeal process is concluded. The only thing I could really deduce from what they barely said was that they weren't giving him the lifetime ban hammer, right? They were not giving Pat Hoberg the Tucapita Marcano. Beyond that, I don't know what part of Rule 21 was actually violated yet because they haven't told us. And I find that to be really frustrating.
Yeah, but typical. They're only going to, this is how they do investigations, right? They're only going to release the bare minimum of what they need to release. I personally would like an absolute detailed rundown of every bet this guy made, along with Ippei Mizuhara and David Fletcher and anyone else who bet. Like anyone else who potentially is involved. If you're breaking rules, let's see what you're doing. Let's see the receipts, right? But I don't think we're ever going to see that because Major League Baseball, I think very quietly has to be worried here that we're like just at the tip of the iceberg, right? And the Titanic is coming. It kind of feels like that a little bit, right? Like we have betting stuff everywhere. Full disclosure, there are betting ads on our website, on The Athletic, on the New York Times. There are betting partnerships at all these stadiums. Everything's presented by all these betting companies.
Pre and post games have, the bet of the night or whatever.
And
they're hitting you with
shocked.
parlay ideas during games. They're telling you, here's a same game parlay you can try. Here's a promo code to try it, right? That's part of baseball as it's presented now because of the league's choices.
Yeah, we are dangling this forbidden fruit and telling people like, don't eat it, don't eat it, don't eat it. Well, these people, eventually someone is going to say, you know what? I've got some inside knowledge here. I could win some money here. I could, it's so tempting, I think. And this isn't, correct me if you guys disagree. I think we're just scratching the surface on this thing. It's only going to get worse because players are now growing up in this betting culture. And we are now seeing, what happens when guys like Ippei use these illegal bookie. We're seeing that it's addiction. We know more about gambling as a disease than we ever did. And we also have somehow let it enter our mainstream culture because of the money. Major League Baseball didn't have to let the betting companies in. They did it because they have a lot of money. That's what all these companies have done. They have a lot of money. And because of this, now they're going to have to deal with the consequences, which is players' involvement, umpire involvement. I'm sure we're going to see more in that regard. Are we going to see coaches involved, managers? Would anything shock you? Is it going to take a star for them to really say, we have a problem? Part of me feels like
a star like Shohei.
Exactly.
But being actually maybe
directly involved.
Yeah.
Which he may be, right? We still never know. We don't.
And you're right. You're right that this is it's probably only going to get worse. And the reason I mean, I think the first group we saw the player dump with Tucupita Marcano, and in that player dump, if you look kind of closely at the dates, you realize that this is like the culmination of like a 4-year investigation, because some of these guys were betting, in 2020 as part of of what they got in trouble for. So that was the first ever player dump of players betting during the time of baseball being in bed with the different betting companies. And so I would say like the first people that get in trouble is a mix of like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. I couldn't do that. Probably the ones that bet on other sports probably thought, or other games within it when they were in the minor leagues or something, like they probably thought, well, I'm in the minor leagues, it doesn't count or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're people that didn't quite understand the rules, or just full on addicted people. Like Marcano's reads like he was addicted. We're talking about hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. eBay too. Yeah.
eBay sounds like he was addicted.
Yeah.
And so, that is like the first salvo. I am interested in this idea that like, what if you come up within this culture, your friends are all doing it, but you're more aware of Rule 21. And so you just have burner phones, and you have a friend who does your bets for you or whatever. Like then that's going to be like the second generation, and that's going to be kind of harder to track, harder to bust. And it could involve, at least privileged information, if not, full on manipulating, the stats. And so, we know that this is a possibility because it happened in basketball. Tim Donaghy was betting on games that he officiated and actually made calls that made it more likely that he won his bets. I guess it's good news that basketball survived that. No, like not many people question the veracity of basketball games anymore. But it is probably a little bit of a view into the future for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
I think people still ask those questions about basketball games. I don't think those have gone away completely. But your broader point, the league is still surviving. The league is still making lots of money. The league as an entity still exists and thrives in its business sense, right? Like there's nothing.
But you're also going to have a
story
problem
that's
with
hurt
umpires.
the NBA.
You're probably going to have umpires, particularly because umpires make so much less than the players.
Well, that's where I think every person involved in the game who makes a lot less money than the typical star player is more likely to
feeding information.
There's so many people around the game
Yeah.
that do not make a lot of money who would be much more susceptible to nefarious behaviors here, right?
Yeah.
Clearly. And that's not the only corner of the game you're worried about. So yeah, it's not going away. This is just the way baseball is now. And I think to Britt's point, this feels like tip of the iceberg. This feels like the first of many stories. And I agree with Britt in that all I really want is the full rundown. Show me, like the easiest thing you can do to ease my concerns,
like
as
an
a
Excel
fan,
dump,
as an analyst,
like a spreadsheet dump.
Publish the data, publish the betting record, put it out there. Every book has it. Like if you play, every contest you enter, every game you play is documented there. Transparency will ease the concerns. And yes, I think some people will try and connect the dots if there's a
some people will say it wasn't a complete
there.
dump. There was more. They didn't give us all the bets.
Isn't that the easiest way to try and reduce concerns and questions about the integrity of the game? Is to say, here, this is what happened. Here's every single thing that happened. All of
Especially
you
have
see it.
confidence
It's right here.
in your own research. Which the one thing I will say in MLB's favor is that they have like pretty intense research practices. I think
they have really good their investigations department, I think, is very thorough. Derek, when you're talking, I just wanted you to yell like, "Show me the money!"
Because I just want to know. We'll know more about the Hoberg story eventually. At least I'm pretty confident we'll learn more after the appeals process plays out.
Yeah, they can't talk about it now. I don't blame anybody for not really talking about it now because it's it's like the court case. We're doing the court case right now, and I can't really talk about it while we're
sure
doing it. But the process does seem weird. I mean, we're none of us are really sure of who issued the ruling and who gets to hear the ruling. We haven't heard anything about sort of arbitrators being involved, so it is possible that Manfred is like issuing the ruling and then listening to the appeal, which means what are you appealing? I mean, that's why that's sort of the process for the like the sticky stuff. It's like once you're in there, you're appealing to Manfred. And so if you're appealing to Manfred and you're just like, no, I didn't put sticky stuff on there. It's like, he's going to be like, and it's the same. go away. So Blanco, you didn't even appeal it. A lot of guys don't even appeal their stuff because it's like, I just got to go talk to Manfred. Never mind.
And this is not, like, again, I'm not implying guilt of anything here. What I'm suggesting is that
more transparency or something.
The league has a vested interest in this not happening. As far as the Pat Hoberg story, right? It's better for them for this to have never happened, right? So if there was some clear and obvious way that they could have just said, no, nothing bad happened here, they would have solved that already. They wouldn't have issued the punishment in the first place, right? Or am I out of my mind? Wouldn't they have done their due diligence to the point of knowing that they had to suspend him for whatever it was Pat Hoberg did before this got out and became a story?
Yeah, that's why I doubt that the appeal is going anywhere.
And that's why I think the appeal's stupid if it goes to Manfred. And it does go to Manfred because what's the difference this time? Like, I can't understand how that would lead to a different outcome, and the league wouldn't want it to. Because then, if on appeal,
the arbitrator said,
but it's Manfred. So like, is Manfred going to go back and say, actually, no, he didn't violate any rules? Like, well, that wouldn't be good. Like, why would the league present it that way? So like, they either didn't do their homework, which I think they did, or they're going to go back on their punishment, which it just makes them look bad either way.
I think the umpires have a really strong union, though, do they not? So don't they have, like, it's kind of like players. Players can appeal decisions directly to the league, and they often lose. They don't often win those either. But it may be something with the union.
Yeah, here's the statement right here. I have devoted my adult life to the profession of umpiring, and the integrity of baseball is of the utmost importance to me. I look forward to the appeal process, and I'm grateful that the Major League Baseball Umpires Association is supporting me in the appeal.
Yep.
That's all Pat Hoberg would say at this time.
So that is kind of, I mean, their union is so strong that even if he's in the wrong, like you said, even if they have no leg to stand on, even if Manfred's going to say, dude, I already reviewed everything, I think they're going to have to appeal it, and he's going to use the umpires union and whatever, lawyer they provide or evidence they have or whatever to try to make a stronger case for himself. That's how it reads to me.
Yeah. So we'll wait for the final verdict to come down, but kind of feels like this one's already been decided, at least in terms of a punishment. It's just a matter of what the final word ends up being. On to the field things. We have parity in mid-June. We have several teams within reach of a playoff spot. In the NL, all but 2 teams are either in a playoff position or within 2 games of a playoff position, exceptions being the Rockies and Marlins, who are 10.5 and I think 12.5 games back, respectively, as play begins on Tuesday. And even that is not insurmountable in a vacuum. You could actually come back from that and be a playoff team. So half the league, 15 teams in the league, are between 33 and 38 wins entering play today. And I got the sense, seeing some of the reaction around Twitter over the weekend, that some folks are not happy about this. Why is it a problem? Is there a reason why parity in mid-June, especially when the season is not even half over, is actually bad? Can either of you enlighten me as to what people are actually upset about here?
See, I mean, you guys might feel differently. I'm okay with it now. If we're sitting here in August and nobody has separated themselves, I think we have a real problem. I mean, this is what the league wanted, is that with all the stuff that they did in terms of the luxury tax and the revenue sharing, is they wanted to level the playing field. And what they did is they created a lot of mediocre teams and they added an extra playoff spot. So where's the incentive for winning your division? Like what the Atlanta Braves have accomplished in winning God knows how many NL East titles in a row. They have 1 World Series over that stretch, right? Look at what the Dodgers have done. 1 World Series over that stretch. So I think if you're a smaller market team or you're an owner doesn't want to spend, you're looking at these teams and you're saying, all we got to do is get in. We only need to be like an 80, 82 win team. And we're good.
Get a little lucky, yeah.
Yeah. We don't have to build this juggernaut. And if we don't get lucky, well, our fans will still cheer for us because we're in it through September, through the last week of the season, right? Which is also what baseball wanted. They wanted every fan to feel like they still had a chance and not people to stop going in July because their season is over, right? Yeah. Which for very few exceptions, most fans, you can make the case, look, our team is in it. We're a hot streak away. Look at the Mets right now. They've won 6 in a row as we tape this. Right in the thick of things now all of a sudden. So I think this is what baseball wanted. And we can argue until we're blue in the face about whether it's good for the game or not good for the game. But I look at it as, how do you change it? I don't see it changing. The players wanted to fight so hard in the CBA to get rid of tanking, and they did some things, some measures that helped, but we're really not addressing the main issue, which is the mediocrity, the love of mediocrity. And I think in order to do that, you need to institute a floor and a cap, and that's just probably never going to happen.
Well, I mean, you could do it with just the floor, but no one's going to give you a floor without a cap.
Correct.
So that's you know, like maybe just a floor could do something about this, make some of the smaller teams pay, but you're not going to get a floor without a cap. It is interesting to think like this is what baseball wanted. Is it? But the upside, the other side of it, which Derek was sort of pointing to, is like even if it is what baseball wanted, and we want to be cynical about that, is it fine for fans? Is it good for fans? Like this seems
why
okay for fans. I think for me so I tweeted something that like, oh, the year 2029, the season ends and every team is within 3 games of 500, and Rob Manfred has a press conference to crow about parity. You know, that was just a sort of a reductio ad absurdum, you know, just like taking it to the absurd level, and I don't think it'll ever get there, but I do think that there's a little bit of a problem with larger playoffs, like more wild cards, more mediocrity, and then crowning someone at the end of it and saying this was the best team. What all this does is reduce the value of the World Series for me. And I know there's a lot of fans who say the winner of the World Series is the best team that year. That's it. They did the thing. They won the championship, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a numbers dork where I'm like, but actually we played 180 other games, you know, and I kind of feel like these other 2 teams were better, you know, and that's going to just happen more and more. So I don't know what happens with that split. Is that split not matter? Is that split always just going to exist? The people are like, that was the World Series best winner, and it doesn't matter. What? Or does it get more absurd? What if somebody gets in 1 game over 500 and just like gets like absurdly lucky and they beat, you know, all the teams that were like 30 games over 500?
I think as of today, the Giants would be the last wild card in the NL. They're 1 game below 500.
There you go.
It won't come out that way. I think people would be furious if a team that was below 500 in the regular season found its way in the postseason and won the entire thing. I think people would get really mad about that. I don't think it's going to happen. It could happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. You just make
it more likely to happen the more you push it together like this.
Let's look back at the last 10 World Series winners. There's a few outliers in the sense of like the teams you remember as being distinctly great teams. The Rangers beating the Diamondbacks last year in 5. I think as we get further away from it is going to be a forgotten World Series, similar to the White Sox sweeping the Astros in 05. And I'm not saying it doesn't count, it doesn't matter. I'm saying in terms of how people think about great teams in this era, unless the Rangers go back a couple of times, at least to like the ALCS or make another World Series appearance, I think they will be lost in history. You go before them, you have the Astros with Dusty Baker winning in 22. That was a team that was good for a very long time, right? People are going to remember that team because they were consistently there. Atlanta in 2021, consistently good. The Dodgers, even though it was the shortened season, consistently good around that shortened season, right? So that's why I think at the time we said, does this count? Does it even matter? It was the shortened season. It was a longer playoff. It was an expanded field playoff. It was actually harder to win a World Series there because you had to win more goofy series to do it. The Nats in 2019, maybe a slight outlier, just in the sense of like not a team that was always good every single year, but they were good for
they're kind of a
heater
team.
Time.
That was kind of a heater team.
That was a really good team. They just started slow and people kind of slept on them. They were 19 and 31.
That's true.
It was a great World Series.
Good team. They
really
had Strasburg, Scherzer, Corbin. That was a really good team.
And they won in 7. So like that was a great outcome just in terms of like, hey, we were entertained.
Great series,
Great teams were there. All that was good. The Red Sox won in 18 before that. The Astros won in 17. The Cubs won in 16. You go back, you have to go all the way back to 2015 when the Royals, who were there in back-to-back years, the Royals lost in 7 the year before they won because Madison Bumgarner turned in one of the most
insane.
absurd postseason performances we've ever seen. So even that one, like some people are probably saying, "Oh yeah, the Royals won in 15."
No,
That was a
no,
good
they were
Royals
good.
team.
Yeah, they
They were a
had a
good
little.
team,
They had
too.
a mini dynasty there. They were good for like 2-3 years. That's not fair. They're
Right.
not like
So we have
yeah.
not really had a major issue with teams that shouldn't be in the World Series getting there. And the Rangers look to me more like a team that will be at least contending and good for the next few years. They spent a lot of money.
The Diamondbacks
they have a good
is
system.
an interesting story to follow. We'll see.
Yeah, they might not
kind of
be a
seem
team
like
that
the team that we're describing. That's like, let's build an 84 win team, and someday we'll be in the World Series, and the other days we'll get a wild card, and some days we'll sell at the deadline.
Right. So do we fear, because of the expanded playoffs being relatively new, are we overcorrecting because of something we just saw? Or is this actually going to be okay?
I think you need to incentivize winning the division again. I mean, we talked about what happened the first round bye. Maybe that's not it. Like maybe there needs to be, I don't know, something else that incentivizes it, because to your point, like, do the people who win March Madness, are those not the real champions to you? Because it's always the hottest team. Is the team that wins the Stanley Cup every year, that's the hottest team. Like, this is how sports work.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise you wouldn't have a World Series, and at the end of September we would just crown a champion, right?
Well, they kind of do that in soccer a little bit.
Premier League does that. Yeah. Premier League does
But
that, and they've got it's a Champions League beyond that, of course. You qualify for that and play all over, all over Europe. But yeah, it's
so it's always going to be a crapshoot, but getting there is hard. Like getting there, it's 162 games. There are no Cinderellas. You don't just go ride a 1 week hot streak. You have to be good for a prolonged period to get there. Is usually, now that they've added that third wild card, I think it kind of changes what makes a playoff team, for better or worse. But in past iterations, it seemed like you had to get there, and then whoever was the hottest team won, and that's just kind of the way it was. Lots of times it ended up being one of the better teams. Sometimes it didn't. That's kind of how baseball works, though. So,
yeah, March Madness is interesting because they
that,
really celebrate it. The whole idea of a Cinderella run, they love that,
Yeah.
And so it is interesting. Whereas my instinct in baseball is to kind of denigrate the team that didn't play that well in the regular season and goes on a heater,
But what if they survived a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of injuries?
Right, like the 19 Nats that were missing Trey Turner and Anthony Rendon, so they started 19 and 31. Did they not deserve to win because they were the wild card team? Or were they actually the best team and they overcame a bad month, right? Like, I don't know. Does Aaron Judge, was what he's doing negated because he had a poor April? No, it's even more impressive because he's been at a ridiculously torrid pace to make up for such a bad April. So I think that's the way you look at it.
My instinct when I see something like this like everybody's like within 500 is to say that there's no really good teams.
Yeah.
And I could do that. I could be cynical right now and kind of go through, these teams that you've lumped together, which include the Pirates and the Nationals and the Mets and the Cubs and, the Reds, and be like, is there really a truly good team in here, But and so then the next thing would be, well, this incentivizes not doing anything, but we have two teams at the top in the Yankees and Dodgers that are obviously said, maybe there is an incentive to go to the middle, but we're not doing that. So it's not like we don't have if we didn't have the Yankees and Dodgers, it would look different. If the Yankees and Dodgers were in this group,
what about the Phillies?
They weren't spending,
and the Orioles? There's other good teams. There's not.
I'm not just, but I'm saying from an expenditure standpoint too. Like from we invested in this team. We have a lot of money.
Phillies spent a lot of money on their
That's
team.
True. Phillies. I should include the Phillies. But if we didn't have those teams at the top that invested a lot in order to sort of get above the fray, then it would be worse. But right now, maybe it is ideal. We have some teams that have decided it's best to make a super team and get out above the fray. And then we have the rest of the crew that's like, no, we're gonna fight, for one of those wild cards and see what can happen.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys think it's GM driven though? Because I think it's to the ownership level that sets the budgets, that tells these 100%. Guys, this is what we're doing, right? So I think if you're the GMs, you're just looking for, okay, we have the same amount of money as 20 teams here, give or take 10, 20 million.
What is the best way we can win?
How do we do this in a smart way, right? Like, how do we do what Cleveland's doing, the Orioles are doing, right? Like, how do we do this? And that kind of makes up the rest of it. I agree. I don't have a problem with it in June. If we're sitting here in September and, nobody has established themselves, it's a little more of a problem. I think baseball wanted a playoff race, and often we don't get division races anymore, right? I think maybe the AL East will be a true division race. It seems like the NL Central is always a division race. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year, but they wanted playoff races, so they added more of these playoff spots, right? So we're going to probably come down to the wire, at least on that third playoff spot, but are we going to have too many playoff races? Probably not, right? Other than 10 teams fighting for a third wild card.
I would say like one of the first years we had the wild card where they started every game at the same time on Sunday, and there were like 6 games that mattered.
Yeah.
That was thrilling. I went to a sports bar where they had all the baseball games on, and I was there with David Appelman for Fangraphs, and we were just like, I don't even know where to look.
Yeah, that year that the Rays and the Red Sox game was on.
I think the Evan Longoria hit like a walk-off to put the Rays in.
So I was that one covering them, and like that. You're right. That was wild. That's what the league wants. They don't want people to tune out the last half of September. They want as many teams as possible. Is it good for the game? I don't know. I think it's good if you're a fan, because most fans can go in September and say, hey, our team has a chance.
But there's a little bit of like, so what if my team like, did some stuff, but didn't really do the big stuff, and could have added one more free agent, but didn't. And then, gets the second wild card and just loses in the first round of the wild card. So I'd be like, could there be a system where that prodded my team into investing a little bit more and being a little bit better, as opposed to sort of settling for this?
I agree.
This is why my rapid expansion plan would be good. There'd be more bad teams that the teams that are contending could acquire players from.
Trade deadline
juice everything.
Trade deadline is going to be
waters
crazy.
It down. Expansion makes it so much worse.
That's the opposite. It makes it better. It makes everything
How
better.
Does expansion make it better?
It makes it better because if you have 36 teams instead of 30, if you go all the way to 40, which is what I really want, you have more incentives to try different things with your roster construction. It's not just the small market versus the big market approach, but there's other approaches. Remember the story Sam Blum wrote about the Angels being like the last chance saloon for a bunch of late 20s, early 30s players who wouldn't have a job elsewhere? And remember all the times we've talked about these ridiculous relievers that teams are getting off of waiver claims that are the 4th, 5th, or 6th best reliever on a team that throw 99 with a nasty wipeout slider? Move that talent around, create more opportunities, have more tiers.
More parity.
Instead of having, like, how many tiers of team are there right now? 3, 4? Like, there's the Yankee, Dodger, Philly, Oriole, whoever you're going to put in the top group. I don't care. You put
3. Then there's the middle, and then there's the bottom.
And then there's teams that, if we had an eliminator or guillotine, they call it in fantasy, but an eliminator style league where at the halfway point, the last 6 teams in the league are done for the season. That'd be cool, especially if those players were available to go play for other teams. Like, your season's over. You don't make any more money. You could do a
lot more fun stuff, but I'm not sure that it fixes parity.
I don't think so.
It doesn't fix parity.
A lot more mediocrity.
I don't know a lot more mediocre players because those filler AAA guys now all of a sudden are in the big leagues.
Yeah.
So you're making the middle more bloated. You're not all of a sudden having more Dodgers teams.
But we're also not expanding the playoffs. We're just adding teams to make playoff spots more scarce. So it's not everybody.
Okay, so that would help too a little bit, yes. But all baseball wants to do is add back playoff spots. So
we have relegation spots in that plan, though. Remember, that's where it gets.
Totally we had a whole plan with relegation. So,
but that's not happening. To the root question, I rarely side with the league and say the league actually has the right idea here. I think this is good. I think it's good to be. School just got out, right? If you are in a place near Major League Baseball, it is much more likely that the team you could go watch is contending right now than not contending. That seems like a good thing for the sport. And as Britt said, if we get to September and there's a lot of teams that we're looking at with negative run differentials and kind of sub 500 records that could actually get to the playoffs, then we've probably gone a notch too far. But I think let's complain about that if we get there. Let's enjoy this while it lasts. Let's say, hey, this is kind of cool. There's some fun stories in here. And maybe the Mets will say, let's add. We exceeded expectations. We have the resources. We can spend money. Maybe you get a few surprising buyers as a result of this. Or
as members of the media, we should actually be rooting for this.
You want chaos. You want a little bit of chaos, especially this time of year.
More storylines, potential storylines. More. It will kill the trade deadline, though. The trade deadline I
It's
don't
kind
know.
of been dead for
Britt
years.
pronounced it
Though.
dead
Gotta
years
be-
ago, so
yeah.
she's
It's
been dead.
decided it's over.
It's been dead. Like it's just until you fix the parity problem and until teams stop hoarding prospects like all these like future lottery tickets when most never hit. It is dead. Trade deadline is dead. So yes. Also, speaking of the attendance or how baseball likes this, I think I saw on Instagram that this past weekend was the most attended baseball games in person league wide since 2008. So parity is kind of working for the league. I don't think the league's upset about that.
Right.
When you
At
go
least
to a
not
game,
now.
is it more fun to go to a game when there's 30,000 people there or when there's 13,000 people there, right? It makes a big difference.
I go to A's and Giants games. I can
Well,
Well,
that's pretty big
Will they let me
difference
move
there.
down or
Yeah, the environment at the ballpark is different. There's more of a buzz with more people in it. It goes kind of without saying, but I just don't see a problem with this. I mean, even the Astros, they're 33 and 39 right now. We look at them, we're like, well, yeah, okay. They released Jose Abreu. Great call by Britt. I thought they were going to wait another year on that. She nailed that call.
Mhm.
But they could rally back and still be a team that is a problem.
They're
come
desperate to win this year.
October.
They just couldn't run that out there anymore.
Yeah. So I look at some of the things like that. The Reds, we talked about them with Trevor on Friday. I like them as a team that could still get a lot better. And as they get healthier, they get Noelvi Marte back. They start doing some things that we expect them to do on paper.
As you
Suddenly
pointed
they can
out,
make
they're
a
the
run.
ones with the positive run differential down there.
Yeah, they're sitting there with a plus 10, even though they're 4 below 500. So they probably deserve a little bit better. I want to see what AJ Preller does. 2 games below 500, still buying. Keep going, AJ.
Yeah,
I'm amused. I just want to be entertained. This is great. So, like,
It
there's
is
a
an
bunch of
entertainment
teams clustered
business.
in there. Yeah, it's an entertainment business. We should enjoy it. We should have some fun with it. The Cubs, are the Cubs going to let their crappy bullpen ruin their whole season? No, they're going to do something about it.
yeah.
They're 5 below 500 right now. They're not going to be 5 below 500 a month from
but
now.
right now there's like 3 sellers.
That's why the deadline is dead. No, it's also, as you guys know, it's going to come down to the day or two before. As much as Derek wants to see like May trades, like it is now going to come down to like the 24 hours before, because so many teams are going to base it off of like the 2-week stretch before the deadline that are
They should move it
straddling
back.
the line.
Also,
I
just
agree.
because your
I totally
playoff-
agree. August 15th, like let's go. August 15th.
Yeah,
The playoff odds will be fluctuate a lot there.
Yep.
I think that was part of expanding the playoffs, that they didn't quite connect to how the middle part of the season works, as they did not move the deadline back yet. That'd be a good move for future years. Push that deadline
Which way?
back 2 weeks.
You
Yeah.
put it into
Mid-August.
Mid-August.
Mid-August. No, not September. Mid-August. You're in or you're out by mid-August. Like,
Mhm.
that's it.
I think that would lead to a little bit more in terms of teams being aggressive, owners maybe being a little more willing to take on that extra salary or two.
Yeah.
It also
On the margins, it would help.
since they got rid of the waiver trade that you used to be able to do in September.
August 31st was the
August
non-waiver
ones, yeah, the
deadline.
August
Yeah, so they had that extra because I think they got rid of that.
Yeah, it's been gone for a while.
So by moving into mid-August, you're recapturing more time to do stuff.
Yes. So I love it. I'm on the love it side. Where are you officially going to fall on this one? Each of you need to vote on this one. I love the mid-June parity.
I like it. I am on the mid-June parity train. I'm good. Mid-September parity, I'm out.
Yeah, I'm obviously the most suspicious of it. I'm going to be tentatively in. I just, I like that. I like that caveat of September. The longer this goes on, the more I'm like, are these a bunch of mediocre teams? And
yeah,
it'll resolve itself. It will fix itself. I'm confident. Have some faith. Have a little bit of faith. So last week we talked about the players poll on The Athletic, and there was a star player who was notably absent from the entire thing. I control-F'd it to be sure. Fernando Tatis Jr.'s name did not appear anywhere in the responses that were published from the 2024 Athletic MLB Players Poll. Britt, you wrote about Tatis a couple of weeks ago before the vacation, and I think he's living in the sweet spot right now as a player who's been suspended for PEDs, who is kind of going through that interim period of no one's thinking about him right now, but they're forgetting what he did in a lot of ways. And now we're getting closer to the point where Tatis could come back, play really well for another stretch, have a few big moments, and kind of quietly move back towards that group of stars that he was once a part of. I actually think we're kind of heading back in that direction. And you wrote a lot about this, like how he's still playing at a high level. At the time you wrote the story, I think his numbers were down a little bit relative to even last season, and he's actually started to heat up a little bit since then. But digging into Tatis a little bit, did you get the sense that he's like more than okay with things being a little quieter around him right now?
Yeah, he is. And it's interesting, guys. The genesis of this story was I was like at Padres camp and watching him, and I was like, man, it's like this guy fell off a cliff nationally, right? Like you just didn't hear much about him anymore. He was everywhere on the cover of MLB The Show and all over MLB social media. And then he gets, popped for PEDs, he gets suspended, he comes back and he gets booed. And I feel like after like a month or two, people were kind of just forgot about him. Now I do have family live in San Diego. I know you're out that way too. I know he's not a forgotten man at all in San Diego.
Well, they love him.
They love him. Yeah, he's very loved. But if you go outside of that bubble, and Padres people that I talked to agree, they're like, yeah, you're right. Like nationally, he no longer is he was the face of baseball. I don't think there's an argument there. He was the face of baseball for a time.
He was like the Ellie.
Yes.
Like remember he like tagged up on an infield fly ball. He like scored from second on a single.
Yeah, he stole home. Like, he was a nightly reel. Yeah. And people loved it. And so
he was like he had national advertisements, you mentioned?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't remember those, but
he did. And Adidas dropped him. He had his own Adidas shoe, like special colorway shoe. And the reason he's able to do those cool cleats he's doing this season is because he doesn't have a shoe deal. He can do a Nike shoe. He can do an Adidas. He did, I think, New Balance or Under Armour for Steph Curry. So it's just so interesting to me because you're right, Derek. Like this guy's lived a full baseball life already, and he's 25 years old. We also forget that. Like
he hasn't even hit his peak yet.
Yeah, he could come back, have 2-3 MVP seasons, and this will just be like a tiny blip. Like, oh, remember when he came back from PED? Like, it's crazy.
He'll come up again at Hall of Fame time.
Yes, it's crazy to me how much he has been through. He changed positions, won a platinum gold glove last year, and I don't think that got nearly as much attention. Like to go from shortstop to the outfield and to play it as well as he played it is remarkable. Like he's just a really interesting talent who, you're right, has somehow dropped from everyone's consciousness. And I don't think he minds very much. Because off the field, as I wrote, he's like quiet. You have to like strain to hear him. He's very soft spoken. And so I don't think he's kind of this like flashy villain that people maybe had in their heads. Like he's not a guy who wants to make headlines. He's not a guy who wants to say something that's going to end up being a soundbite at all. I think he goes out of his way to be intentionally boring.
Yeah. He's got a little bit of the Jeter.
Yes. And he did say to me, like, I want to be in the conversation for like the it guy in baseball because it means I'm playing well. But he also said, like, I don't mind not being in the spotlight. Like he admitted all that stuff kind of took a toll on him a little bit. And I don't think people realize, when you're 22 years old and all of a sudden you're on the cover of video games and you have all these deals and endorsements and like you can do no wrong, how much you really think you're totally infallible, right? And not making any excuses for him. I just think, there is a danger, and we still do it in baseball, and running these 20, 21, 22-year-old guys up the flagpole as the next Griffey or the next Jeter or the next whatever, instead of just kind of letting them play for a little while. And that fall is so mighty from the top. And that's what we're dealing with Tatis. You don't really know what the next chapter is. Is he going to be a guy who we always say, oh, so much talent never really hit his ceiling? Or is he going to reestablish himself similar to Acuna, who had those down years, not because of PEDs, but because of his knee, and then all of a sudden reestablished himself again last year? I don't know. And you can make the case with Acuna that we may sit and say, what happened with his career? Because we don't know what's going to happen now coming off of this other injury. So it's really interesting with these young Latin guys, how the game perceives them, I think, and kind of what their legacy is going to be in like 10, 20 years. Like, what are we talking about when we talk about Fernando Tatis in 20 years?
Yeah, the weirdest thing about being in the middle of a career is that a lot of times for Hall of Fame, just, you have to consider the fullness of their career. So the end of their career. So a lot of times the last 10 years of a career can mean more. for your chances of being in the Hall of Fame than the first 10, but we always remember the sort of emergence on the scene and the flash. And if Acuna's legacy is going to be tarnished by injury, and if he doesn't come back fully, then he might have a similar dip in what people perceive of him and his career. But one thing that's awesome for me as a numbers geek and looking at what Tatis is doing is like, I think it's actually I don't think it's crazy to talk about the MVP in him, and maybe this year he's not going to be in the mix, but I'm looking at like the National League leaders, and you've got Mookie Betts, who just got hurt, and you're gonna subtract 6 weeks off of his full season. So I don't know if it's gonna be him. Shohei's there, Freddie's there, Ketel Marte is having a good season. Bryce Harper's having a good season. They'll all be in the mix. But right now by WAR, Tatis is in the top 25. And if you look under the hood, like his max EV, his raw power is all the way back to where it's been. He's hit a ball harder this year than he's ever hit in his career. And his strikeout rate and swing strike rate are at the best of his career. So he could actually be on the precipice of like a whitening hot streak. The only thing that doesn't line up with his regular career, he's not pulling the ball as much. If he just becomes a little bit more aggressive in the next couple of months and like, I don't know, hits like, like 15, 12 homers between now and the beginning of July, like not crazy. I think he could vault himself into the mix for MVP this year. But then just thinking about the fact he's 25 years old, that gives him 2 or 3 more shots at an MVP type career type season. So yeah, I think he's absolutely an MVP talent, and he's kind of going under the radar right now. I mean, I don't think if somebody was talking about the contenders for the NL MVP crown, they wouldn't include him right now. But he could change that in a month. Right,
it's close enough this year. It does feel a lot like everyone's chasing Shohei for MVP like every single year that Ohtani's healthy.
Yeah,
and that's happening right now. You're right to point out with Betts going down, though. That's one fewer legit contender that everybody's trying to overcome. There's some surprising names on the NL WAR leaderboard right now.
Profar's ahead of him.
Yeah, he's having a hell of a year.
Profar's season, it's a great story, though, because Jurickson Profar, there was a time, people listening to this show probably remember, he was the number 1 prospect in baseball, hands down. He was supposed to be a superstar, right? A switch hitting shortstop for the Rangers that was going to come up and do everything. He was going to hit for average. He's going to get to some power. He was going to have speed. He's going to play great defense. Had major shoulder injuries, missed a ton of time. And, the time he spent in Texas, the last year he was there, he had a 20 homer, 10 steal season, which was a pretty big deal at the time. I know stolen bases are free now and things have changed a lot in the time since then. He's bounced around a little bit between Oakland and now San Diego. And even this year, he was a free agent deep into the free agent process.
He signed a $1 million deal?
Signed super late to go back to San Diego for a $1 million deal.
Yeah. And
here he is as like a top 10 player in the NL through almost the first half of the season and putting up the best season of his career. So it's just a good story to see him maybe make a run at being that player that people thought he was going to be. Health is finally been on his side for a few seasons and seems like he's really found his home in San Diego, where they were desperate for outfield help too. So it's just worked out better than anyone could have imagined. Like the script writers should get an A on this one so far. I mean, we'll see how it ends, but I love the beginning of the season for Profar.
Yeah. I mean, he carried them through some early stretches. It is interesting. I mean, he probably right now, if you have to say who's an all-star in San Diego, it's Profar. He's your top guy. And I don't think he's ever been to an all-star game either. I think I saw on social media someone like promoting it or promoting him because it really would mean a lot to him. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's interesting because I actually talked to him in spring training about Adrian Beltre, who obviously is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame in July and working on a bigger thing about that. And, he talked about how nobody had a greater impact on the way he mentally sees the game than a guy like Beltre. And even though I think he didn't pan out the way he was supposed to in Texas, having guys like that when you're coming up, I think can carry you through those lean years and those tough stretches, like watching guys who, are among the best to do it and have those guys take you under your shoulder. I mean, he would take Profar out and buy him clothes and, mentor him and pull him aside after at bats and like really, I think changed the trajectory of how Profar approached the game.
Because he could have easily been a bust, it's a little bit of mental fortitude to stick with the game and keep doing it, especially like, 1 year, $1 million deal. He might have had better offers from Japan or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe.
So very cool story.
He pointed out that his son, he's got a 6-year-old son who loves baseball. And he wants to make the all-star team because it's a big deal for his son. He's like, I've never cared about the individual accolades, but it'll mean everything to him. So that's really cool. A lot of good stuff around Jurickson Profar, a guy that I think most of us, when he signed, were like, well, he'll be the stopgap until someone else comes along. And it turns out, nope, we were wrong. In
the season previews, we gave his job to like 3 or 4 different people, some of whom are not on the Padres anymore, like Jacob Marcy and
Graham Pauley, different guys like that. Yeah, good story, though, out of San Diego. In case you missed it, and I know Britt didn't miss this, Snoop Dogg dropped by the Brewers TV booth on Saturday. I didn't know it was coming. I happened to see first pitch that day, and on social, everybody was like sharing Brewers stuff, which almost never happens. I got my usual people I follow that share Brewers stuff, but it was everybody. Because Snoop was in town for a concert on Saturday night, and he threw out the first pitch, but then he was in the booth for like 22 minutes. I was listening to it again today. It is amazing. And I think it's so tempting to have an inning or two in the booth where you get someone to drop by and it goes so well and it's so fun that, who else could do this? Can we do this every day? Can we just throw anybody out there? And the answer is no, you can't throw just anybody out there. And I think part of what made it so good,
it wouldn't hit those heights, but
it would never hit those heights.
We could do more of this.
We could do more stuff like this. There's a trap we could fall into, and I'll get to the trap in a minute. Yeah. But I think part of why it worked so well with Snoop, it's because of who he is. But you could tell he just loves sports. Like he was just excited about different things happening in the middle of this game between two teams that he didn't have a rooting interest in. He talked about being a big Steelers fan and a big Lakers fan, but otherwise he described himself as a fan of great athletes. So that's more of just the curiosity of, I'll just watch what's going on today. And there's a point where Ellie De La Cruz makes a throw from short, and he reacts in a way of just someone who's just admiring what he's seeing on the field and not just watching a play that happens a handful of times in a typical game, right? And I think that sort of enthusiasm is what's missing in the booth on a regular basis.
We got to hear that.
Great announcers, yeah. So I've got the clip for it.
I so good.
Players come in there because I'm a player. Get up in there. Oh, he's saying if he can't throw that, he ain't got no arm like that. No, he don't.
He does, though.
No, he don't.
Oh, he does.
Who is that with that rocket?
Ellie De La Cruz.
Oh, Lord.
With a howitzer.
He got a rocket in his pocket. Oh, he made that.
Are you having fun?
I'm having too much fun.
Can you hang?
You could probably find 40 snippets from the time he was in there where everybody in the booth, everybody watching was just having a great time. And this is like second and third inning of a Brewers-Reds game on a Saturday afternoon. So I do think you can do stuff like this. What I don't want, here's the trap. The trap is that teams are sitting around, media people who are working extremely hard to say, how do we make our broadcast pop? We got 162 games. How do we make these games interesting? Or how do we add something different? I hope you don't get this idea in your head that, oh, wait, let's just have like the same person do it all the time. That would be the trap, right? Because it won't be as good if Snoop does this for every single team over the course of the season.
They put him on the national
all of those different things. Like you start to lose the quality the more you try to replicate it.
And so, even if it's not just Snoop himself, and you just did 162 guests.
That's a lot of guests. You're not going to do guests all the time. I think it's more like once a week.
A lot to ask of that production.
Yeah.
Once a week
and
or every other
PR
week. And you don't know what you're going to get from a lot of guests on live.
Some of them aren't going to be good.
Yeah. Some of them aren't going to be as engaging, right? So my fear would just be that, oh, hey, Michael Rappaport's agent called and he wants to do a spot in all 30 booths. Like, no, I don't need 30 hits from Michael Rappaport trying to promote baseball. Like, I don't know if he even likes baseball. It doesn't matter. But the point is, I think it's almost the element of surprise for us when we're watching and listening to games, having someone there that we didn't know was going to be there that day. Like that kind of added something to it as well. If they hyped it up for a few weeks, even that I feel like would have been less cool than just turning the game on one day and being like, hey, what's Snoop doing in the booth at the Brewers today?
And what I really liked about Snoop too is that he was kind of like a fair weather fan. Like he was like kind of somebody who didn't know all of it. The more you know, especially the broadcasters know a ton. I think you fall into these sort of like either you're a little bit cynical about the game, or you know what I mean? Like you fall into these like you're not like fresh faced being like, wow, you know? And so Snoop coming in kind of reminds you of all the cool athletic things that we see, some of which we just sort of parse as like, yes, Elliot has a good arm. Yeah, that wasn't actually particularly that close of a play. You know what I mean? Like whatever. Yeah. It was a ground out, dude. You know, like so part of you wants to be like, Snoop, that was a ground out. But it's so great to like have that, you know, capture that energy. So it's almost better not the less that I don't want them to know nothing about baseball, because then it turns into like them explaining baseball to somebody. But he hit that real sweet spot of somebody who knows how baseball is played, knows about the game, but doesn't know every single player and doesn't know all, you know, every single, you know, nuance. So I thought that was great. And I think that, you know, music might be a good place to start with this. Like I was thinking like, what would Zach Bryan be like in there? Like, you know, there's a real affinity from the players to him in terms of his music, and like I mean, he must be aware of baseball, and he's always touring. So like, you know, that'd be interesting to see what his sort of deal would be in the box. And then
if he's listening August in Philly, I'll be at the concert. So maybe if the Phillies are home,
I can help facilitate.
you can work that. But no, you're right. I mean, Pete Alonso got on stage with him this year. I think, did you see that?
Yeah, and Brent Rooker hit a walk-off and then got on stage with him.
Yeah, so you're right.
Yeah,
I think musicians, I also think comedians would inject a little fresh life into it too. If you had a comedian do a little bit. Because you're right, what it brought, besides like the coolness factor, because Snoop Dogg is just like effortlessly cool forever, was like the fact that if you're someone who's not that into baseball and you're watching it because your husband's making you or your wife's making you or whoever, you're kind of like, oh, I want to pay attention. I want to watch Snoop, right? Oh, I want to watch Zach Bryan. I want to watch this comedian I like for a few minutes, talk about it, right? So you're kind of bringing in fair-weathered fans. I think will go to games because it's fun to sit outside and drink a beer and it's fun to be, but like, they won't often watch games, right? So I think if you're getting that, if you're baseball, you're trying to get that. Like, how do we get people who will go to a couple games because it's a social thing to do, but won't really watch it? How do you get those
into the
people?
social aspect of baseball that I think is actually sort of unique. There's something about baseball that is like it's going to sound denigrating, but it's not. You don't have to watch every single play. You know, like
spoiler alert, no one does. Even when you're on the beat, you're like typing and tweeting and like.
That's why I think this trend in making spaces at the park that are more like bars is actually a good one. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to hang out with people and then be like, oh, something interesting is happening, and then back to the conversation. Like I got yelled at a preseason football game. I was at a preseason football game in the bleachers at Gillette, and I was just trying to talk to my friend. I was like, this game doesn't matter. I'm just trying to talk to my friend. And some guy yelled at us for talking too loudly to each other and not paying attention to the game. And I was like, this game doesn't matter, dude.
I can see this unfolding. This is the story tracks.
You're right, though. Baseball has so many games. They have to do something.
Everyone's just hanging out. It's more of a like a picnic sport, you know? Like that's why I love berms. You know, you can just sit on the berm. Just sit on the berm. Maybe a ball comes to you.
Right.
You know.
So maybe you do so that's I think how you bring the people in that aren't at the game, the fair weather people, is you're like, Snoop or Dr. Dre. Can I hear Dr. Dre on the mic for an inning? Like, I'm in. Where's he gonna be at? Right? Nelly, huge baseball fan. Can I hear Nelly? Like, not to just name like the people that I loved in the 90s and early 2000s, but I mean,
that's the demographic. That's the demographic. You want more of those people watching. So.
I mean, if you're asking me, like, that's what I want to hear. Like, you know, I don't know. Like, tell me if like Taylor Swift didn't do an inning in the booth that they wouldn't break all kinds of viewership for those few innings, right? Look what the NFL did, right? Like, you have to embrace that a little bit. This is entertainment. This is social. Isn't Vanessa Hudgens married to a player?
Yeah.
An Angels player?
Cole Tucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, again, all these people are going to be winners.
Well, that might
as
be
Derek said.
problematic having her in the booth for an Angels game.
It'd actually be kind of fun.
Who's that
if she
handsome man?
Did.
They should play him more often.
I mean,
That could be
I
funny,
don't know.
I
You can
guess.
do all kinds of stuff with it. Like, I don't know. I've often thought of like, there are some really hilarious player wives. Like, why can't they get the wives in there to roast these guys for like an inning or two? Like, there's some hilarious like relievers' wives who
This
would
does
love.
seem to open up like a whole. The only sort of caveat I have is that these aren't like high-paying jobs that are easy to do.
No,
a lot of these,
no.
and we are asking them to do a lot more. But it could potentially lead to higher-paying jobs for them, and it could lead to more people watching. And we do have a little bit of a crisis of watching right now when it comes to Bally's dying, pre and post game shows kind of having trouble. Even all these networks, all of them are having trouble sort of with viewership. They'll report like good numbers at the end of the year where like more people watch us streaming than ever, but like
yeah, but streaming's still growing if you pull back, like streaming was new 10, 15 years ago. So the chart's still going up because people are still switching from old cable into streaming, even though most of us have been streaming for a few years, right? Like that's misleading. That's the way it's always presented that way. But I think
there has to be a crisis of viewership if you know that Bally's is going belly up. Like that's like there's obviously something there.
Yeah, things aren't all perfect if that's the situation. But I think the important thing you threw out there that I've forgotten about this because when I go to a game, it really depends like who I'm with. Like the people I'm with will dictate how focused I am on the game.
That's true too. Yeah.
So if I'm there, like if you and I went to a game, we'd probably watch it a certain way. But if we went to a game with like
nerd stats and talk about,
I was going to say, I would love to be behind you guys.
But then if we end up going with a bunch of our friends who are not as into baseball as we are, we're not going to watch the game the exact same way as if it was just you and I going to a game.
When I bring my kids, it's it can be sometimes more educational, like sort of lower level analysis, and
I don't know if I've always appreciated the differences in like how I'm consuming baseball given the circumstances. That's unique to me. Most people consume it the way that I consume it with a larger group of people where it's a lot more laid back. And I need to think more about that group because that's the group that shows up at the ballpark, buys a ticket.
That's the bigger group.
Wants to play more. That's the larger group of people. So that's where the question about the parity came from too. It's like, well, you want more people to care about the game. So even if that's Major League Baseball's initiative.
I was bringing my nerd bias to the table, be like, but are they all good? Who cares?
Look, they'll determine whether or not they're good over the next 85 games. Like they will play all those games, and we will learn a lot about them over the course of that, right? So, just trying to be more mindful of all that. That's something I've been trying to do the last.
And in light of our whole British baseball brouhaha, I would say that this is on the road to more inclusiveness.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's more inclusive of lighter level fans. It's more inclusive of hip hop fans. It's more inclusive of different ways into the game, like you just said.
Right. It's not a contest to see who can be the most nerdy. That's what I thought it was like 10 plus years ago. It shouldn't be that. It will not be fun if it's that. It will be a lot more fun going the other direction.
This is why there's giveaways and theme nights because they know
fireworks.
that you have to get people into the park somehow. That not everyone is this diehard. Like you got to get people in. And if you're going to have fireworks after the game, if you're going to have dogs at the stadium, like those nights sell out. People will pay a lot of money to bring their pups, myself included, to the ballpark.
Yep.
My pups just bark the whole time.
Some aspiring good boys are not quite ready to go to the game at the park. And is the dog parent of two of those aspiring good boys. We're going to head out on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription to The Athletic at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Find Britt on Twitter at Britt_Giroli. Find Eno at Eno Saris. Find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. It's going to do it for us. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.